Welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. This is episode number 70. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Conrad Weaver. I'm your host for the show, and I'm the director of the PTSD 911 documentary. And my goal is to bring you content that will help improve your life. Welcome to the new studio. I hope you like it. My wife and I have moved, and we're in a brand new space, and I've been working to create a studio. And I'm still working out some of the kinks, so if there's some crazy things happening, just know that it's going to improve. So hopefully that will be the case. Hey, and just a reminder that this Friday, February 21st at 12 noon Eastern Time is our second episode in our live series. I have retired police chief Neil Gang on the live program. He played a small but important part of my film, PTSD 911. And you don't want to miss this live interactive conversation on Friday, February 21st, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. To register for free, visit ptsd911movie.com and click on the live button, or click on the link down in the show notes below, and I'll see you there on Friday. Don't miss it. Hey, why do so many first responders die by suicide? Yeah, it's a question that all of us keep asking, and I'm not sure we'll ever have a firm answer, but one Chicago cop is on a mission to find out. Liz Pol is a police officer in the city of Chicago, and she has a degree in forensic psychology, and she studies first responder suicides. Suicide autopsies help us in answering the why question. So stay tuned for this powerful and informative discussion right here on the First Responder Wellness Podcast. Hey, if you're new to the channel or to the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review if you think it's worth it. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. I always enjoy reading your comments, and knowing what you like or what you don't like really helps me shape the show. So thanks again for listening. And now here's my conversation with Liz Pol. Well, Liz, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so glad we're able to connect.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I think I first saw you in person up at IACP in Boston a few months ago.
Yes, last year in October, was it?
Yeah.
That's where we met.
Yep. So tell us a little bit about you. What's your background and what do you do?
So I'm a Chicago police officer. I've been on the job for 21 years now. I am also a mental health professional. I have a master's in forensic psychology and did a lot of clinical work there. And my focus is on suicide and trauma. I went on to get certified in being a suicide psychological autopsy investigator. And so I take cases of first responder suicides and military, and I essentially go back from a forensic psychological standpoint and really try to dissect working backwards from the day of the death on, as far as we have to go, to really try to answer the questions of why the individual took their life by suicide, why those means, and why that day. And it's unfortunately so sad that it's not until after the fact that we get so many answers that people are looking for. But we've really been able to kind of really pick up on patterns and understand more of like the behaviors and the signs that people should be more aware of. And so that's kind of my focus. I started a not-for-profit to really push out a lot of this knowledge and information behind suicide for first responders, to try to give everybody the resources and the tools necessary to be able to navigate through their careers or personal lives and moving on even after that in retirement.
Boy, I have so many questions.
First of all, too, especially when we mentioned those autopsies.
Yeah. So first of all, what got you interested in becoming a forensic psychologist? Is that right? Is that how I say? Is that how you say it?
So yeah, and my master's is in forensic psychology. So I was always definitely interested in going back into getting my master's in psychology. I wasn't necessarily sure what. My undergrad is from DePaul in psychology. So I knew I was going to be going back. And so I started the job first as a young 20-something-year-old on the department. And then I was going to school at the same time. So I would work nights, on the street, and I would go to school and do practicum and internship during the day. So I knew I was going to go back into it, and it really got me interested because it's a lot of like law and like the forensic field combined with psychology. So, I mean, there's so many avenues that you can take within that. And that was really the interest for me. And suicide became of such a major interest for me, and really wanting to research more and understand everything along the lines of suicide, because we had so many happening in our agency and across the country and other agencies. I didn't know when I first got on the job that this was something that was happening so often, and it was pretty disturbing. And it was the chatter amongst everybody when it would happen, and I would observe basically everybody's reaction to it. There was so many questions, and there were so many potential, opinions of what happened, what could have happened. A lot of people were always left with so many questions and trying to make sense of it. And so for me, early on as a young officer, that was really what my focus became, is really trying to understand that and getting involved in trying to get a lot of those answers that we were looking for.
Are you then using some of those answers then to kind of help prevent suicide in the future for other people?
So I love that question, because it's not so much that we're absolutely able to prevent the suicides, right? Like, I'm very realistic in seeing how this phenomenon occurs and how complex it really is. It's not so much that we're able to prevent all of them. So I don't really like using that word of preventing. I definitely like the idea of having gotten so many answers from these suicide cases. There is a way to intervene and maybe be more proactive way ahead of time by offering everybody the knowledge, right? Because what I have found the most is that there is a huge knowledge gap when it comes to suicide and understanding, like, where does this begin with an individual, and why this one individual versus 500 of other individuals in the same occupation over here. You know what I'm saying? So it was kind of like, when you start to look at them, you understand that it's not just one particular reason and one cause. It's a variety of causes. And it's not just the job. The job is a huge component, especially because of this work that we do as police, as fire, paramedics, dispatchers, and as military. The job is unique in and of itself, and there's so many more added pressures and traumas. But it's also the personal life, right? And how the two kind of interact with each other and spill over. So, and then mental health, your physical health, sleep deprivation, I have found is such a huge issue. And we all know this. We know we don't get enough sleep, but we're kind of like, yeah, well, that's just kind of how I've always functioned, right? But over time and with age and other issues, like, it just isn't the same. And so that's difficult. Psychotropic medications not being managed properly. Those are a lot of like our anti-anxiety, antidepressants, and mood stabilizers that people take. And the fact that they're just not monitored properly by the right doctor, and people are just kind of like, well, I'll take one today, I'll take one tomorrow, then I won't for like 3 days, and then I will for like 4. Like, when it comes to these medications, it's not like any other med that you can kind of just go cold turkey off of. You have to be very careful. And so a lot of those cases, you have people taking those in not the appropriate manner. And on top of it, mixing it with maybe alcohol, which is even more of a danger than if you were to mix it with an antibiotic. Not saying that that's okay, but it's so much more complex, and people become more at risk for suicidal ideation and other dangerous behaviors that you don't even have control over. So it's really trying to educate and bringing the information forward to everyone way ahead of time. I believe it's necessary, like from the recruit level, like when you're entering into this occupation, like an academy, in-service training, and then definitely as you're approaching or now in the retirement phase of your career. Because it just really is so important to have options and understand what's happening with me, what do I have going on? How can I handle this? We're in denial a lot of times and we don't want to admit it, but we know when something's off. And so having those options and not being, and kind of removing a little bit of that fear factor or minimizing it so that we can do better for ourselves, instead of when we're already in crisis and everything's hit the fan, it's just so much easier to come back from.
So tell me how that process works. Do people call you to come do the study? How does that work?
So the methodology behind it is really interview of the closest individuals to the deceased person. So a lot of times it's, obviously family, like parents, if they're still living, significant others, co-workers, children, if they're like adult children in some cases, and then just other friends that are on or off the job, just the closest individuals, because we're really trying to look at every single aspect of the person's life from the day they took their life as far back as we need to go. In some cases, in some instances, we do tap into a lot of childhood issues, especially traumas that were never.
I was wondering
dealt
about
with.
that. I was wondering if that really kind of comes up in your discoveries there.
Yeah, you'd really be surprised. Every case is unique in of itself, and it's every case is handled individually, and they're different. But I do find that, and I've known this for some time, that when it comes to first responders, there's kind of a commonality there where there's a lot of individuals who've experienced some type of trauma to some degree. I mean, and there's various types of traumas, especially in childhood, that kind of becomes a calling for them, if you will, this occupation. They want to help others. They maybe want to be there to like keep other individuals from going through what they've gone through. There's a bit of a commonality there. And so the problem is, like any trauma, if you don't process traumas and you don't deal with them, we can suppress them for as long as we can until we just can't anymore. And they eventually find their way to like surface again. And then for a lot of individuals, certain traumas before this job will all of a sudden surface, because when you start dealing with similar triggers that will, for that trauma on the job, that becomes very difficult to navigate, or new traumas. And so ultimately, even though we're adults and we've in a sense gotten through, if you will, that trauma that we maybe, put away, we like,
if you haven't dealt with it, it's still there,
years
right?
ago, it's still there.
Yeah.
And so sometimes for some individuals that does come back up, and that actually taps into now the adult life and their function, their ability to function, and their relationships and their personal lives, and so on. So it varies. It varies, but yes.
Man, this must really be, one, interesting for you since you've studied this stuff, but then also it's heavy, right?
Yeah.
So I was going to ask this later on, but how do you deal with the heaviness?
Yeah. So I know that it's always going to be heavy information. And my biggest concern is how I approach the family and friends and all the individuals that I interview. For the most part, my concern is making sure that they're comfortable, that that I'm not making them relive the trauma, and they're good. But yes, I will say that I think after the fact, I feel like, each interview, it's like so heavy because it's a lot. And I'm also trying to be there for them and making sure that they're comfortable and moving at the speed that they need. So yeah, it can be a little dark and heavy sometimes, kind of stays, you're kind of playing this over, of course, as, an individual in this field, of course, I'm like thinking about it, trying to analyze it, right? Making sense of it, it's kind of like putting a puzzle back together in a sense. So I do make it a point to try to find a balance where, I have things that keep me occupied outside of doing this work. I know I have my small children, and I know that can be a handful, but I do find enjoyment in spending time with them, I do have extracurricular activities I like to do. I like to dance. So, I'll go out to like my dance classes kind of a thing. I have a big support system with my family, my husband's family. Like we're all very, very close knit. And overall, just like my friends too, I like to every once in a while have a girls' night where I go out to dinner, and just kind of hang out and have adult time with my friends to chat about just life. So yeah, it's important to have a bit of an outlet because it does become very heavy. So, and then I have some other friends that are like in the field and they are actual psychologists that, sometimes I'll just kind of like, hey, I need to vent a little bit. And, they're pretty much there for me. So yeah, I will say support systems are huge.
And this work is outside your police work, right?
Yes. Yeah. This work that I do is completely separate from my duty with the Chicago Police Department. I go in as a police officer and do my tour of duty daily. And this work is done completely separate through the not-for-profit Resilient Heroes that I started.
Have you done some work for officers within the Chicago Police Department?
As far as
suicides that have happened in the PD?
Yes, I have. There have been, for the most part, most of the autopsies, because a lot of people don't even know about them. They don't even know it's a thing. I tend to approach a case, so the family of the individual. A lot of the agencies, I would say across the country, one, don't know about them. And two, if they are familiar, they're a little hesitant because, and I understand, they don't really know much about them. And it just kind of seems like, well, wait, like we don't really want to blame to go on us, so I think there's a hesitation there because of the fear of being blamed. But what I try to explain to everybody is the idea behind doing these, at least for me, is trying to get answers and understand what has happened, right? This keeps happening over and over again. And we're not doing much across the country other than, the suicide happens. We have an emotional response to it. And 5 to 7 days after we've laid the individual to rest, we're basically back to business as usual until the next one. So for me, it's more of trying to get the answers to try to understand what happened? How did this even evolve? At some point, if possible, is there anything that we can do? That was my thinking very early on. Is there anything at all that we can do to maybe intervene, to be more proactive, to pick up on this, like anything? And so in a lot of my findings and all the data, there really has been a lot of behaviors that are indicative of suicide. And isn't until after the fact that people are kind of like, oh, I didn't know that was staring me at that, it was staring me in the face, these behaviors or these signs, but I didn't know that they were indicative of suicide. And I tell people, of course you didn't, because this is not something that you're trained to identify or you're educated on. So I felt creating a curriculum that would be able to start presenting to different agencies across the country to really discuss this. And also the design of it was so important. As a first responder myself, who still sits in that trainee seat, it's very difficult to get us to really take information in. We're a very stubborn breed, and we tend to be in control and know a lot. But if the delivery isn't done a certain way, we're really not paying attention or taking it in to have it resonate with us. So for me, having that first responder and bringing in those examples and that information that really relates to the first responder, then also that psychological educational component, I felt that it would be great to set this up and be able to start this conversation where it's a two-way conversation. We're really diving into this. It's really not me talking at them or, doing death by PowerPoint. It's really just integrating it all and being able to have people become more aware of what this really looks like and what this all means and how they can apply it for themselves or any other individual that may be a coworker.
So the data that you collect from the family and the people around, do you then use that to to help the family and the close individuals bring closure to this? Does that help them? Does that, and how does that help them?
So yes, so the cases that I've done, obviously everything is very confidential. I tend to have a one point of contact individual that I first start working with, and that individual will be the only one that I will give the final write-up on all of the information. It's about like 15 pages of every single piece, every aspect of the whole entire case. I'll discuss the case with each individual that I interviewed initially to go over it with them. But the one final copy I give to that one point of contact, because I really feel that it's important to respect, this not going around or being passed along. And a lot of the information that I get from everyone there, it's all written out in a form where it's not discussed like who gave me what info, like, John told me this, and then, I don't know, Mary told me this. It doesn't go that way. It really is just kind of like, it's a very professional written out report that really just describes a lot of the information that I gathered and what that is indicative of and what we saw and all of that. And I do believe that for a lot of the families, as I've sat with them, I know this isn't going to change the outcome. We know that we can't bring the individual back. And I do explain this to them, it's really they understand why I'm doing it. And so a lot of them are very cooperative and want to move forward, because I do feel that they are left with a lot more questions than answers. And so it does bring them some closure. And then at the same time, they would love this is what I find often, is that they all want to help any way they can so that no one and no other family member has to go through this again.
Wow. So what are some of the key indicators that you've found that keep rising to the top?
So interpersonal relationship issues, I would say, is really just at the top of the list of factors that are definitely present, risk factors that are present. Along with, I had mentioned earlier, psychotropic medication mismanagement, along with, alcohol and drug use of some sort, like both present or one or the other. A lot of the alcohol, mismanaged, use of the alcohol, like when we're using alcohol to cope versus engaging in alcohol, like from a social standpoint, that's huge. I've also seen a lot of what people aren't really even realizing or paying attention to is traumatic brain injuries. It's really interesting too, because in our work, we half of the time don't even realize that we have these traumatic brain injuries. Because a lot of us, for the most part, it's tricky when it comes to the brain. If we don't see the actual injury, it's very hard for us to come to terms with like, oh, something's wrong, or I should go get checked out. It's like if I banged my head from a fight, or, I'm trying to take someone into custody and I bounce my head off the concrete, or I'm in a squad car accident, if I don't see any bleeding or anything, it's kind of like, well, I'm fine. But nonetheless, I did hit my head. We should maybe have that checked out. But it's not until later that we start to realize, actually, when we see the behaviors, we see behaviors that are indicative of, hey, something's going on. And yeah, if you think about it, about a month ago, these symptoms started after so-and-so hit his head or whatever it may be, contact sports or anything. And so I've had some cases where the possibility of a brain injury that went untreated and undiagnosed, and a concussion that was present, and it kind of, definitely was something that you started to see where like the behavior, the mental, physical, emotional behaviors started to decline for the individual. So those are some big ones. Along with others.
What should an officer or a firefighter do if they've had some kind of a, head injury? What are some of those steps that they can do to mitigate those, following problems that you may occur?
So, like I said, for the most part, we all pretty much know when we're really good or we're not, right? We're great at admitting like, oh, I'm fine. Everyone's running around saying they're fine, and we're like, not even close. I definitely would like to say that when it comes to especially like a head injury or even any kind of like mental health, like you're kind of off, you've been, I would pay attention to knowing that you're not pretty much the same, something's going on, and really wanting to seek at least from the very beginning your primary physician and letting them know like, hey, I've been, this isn't me usually. I've been having more headaches, rage, and a lot of like mood issues are something that we want to pay attention to closely, especially if you've had some kind of like head injury, irritability, just kind of like a fuse, right? Because there's just so much going on. And a lot of the times, like we're in pain and it causes, like we see it actually come out through rage or frustration or like having a shorter fuse and like popping off on like our closest individual, like closest to us, our family members, right? Because we're the most comfortable around them. That's when you really have to start considering, like, especially if you know that there was some kind of injury that maybe you didn't really do anything about because we were fine, you might want to get checked out. That's something to really consider. And when it's like really off compared to what your, usual behaviors are like.
I have to say that when I saw you in Boston, I had just a day or two before I was in Spokane, Washington, and I had a head injury at the hotel, and I was not well in Boston. In fact, I came home early to go see a doctor. And,
oh, wow.
It was, I was kind of loopy. So,
yeah.
Then actually I went to my family physician because I came home and she wasn't available. So I had to go to like urgent care and they're like, oh, you'll be fine. So
Right.
I went to my family physician and she ordered a whole battery of tests, like CAT scans, all this stuff. So,
wow.
Which ended up being okay, I think so.
Wow. And one of the things I always urge fellow first responders, like when I do this psychoeducation, the trauma and suicide psychoeducation that I go presenting, I always try to really present to these individuals that like you need to learn how to advocate for yourself. When you're dealing with whether it's mental, it's physical, whatever it is that you're experiencing, and you go to a professional, you're aiding this professional in your treatment plan. So to sit there and just kind of like let somebody just kind of minimize or say, oh, you're good, you're fine. And just no, you know what you're feeling better than anyone else, better than any doctor. And the doctors are great and they are trained medically and they have the education to be able to guide you into what we're going to do, but they need you to be able to voice what it is that you're experiencing. And if you feel that you're not being heard or they're not, you've already done something and you're like, hey, listen, we tried that and that didn't work. We're not going to waste our time. We need to move on to a more invasive approach. If they're not listening, then you need to find someone else. So, and I talk a lot about like from the psychological standpoint, when it comes to the world of psychology and psychologists, I'm really trying to have everyone understand that, first of all, psychotherapy is not the only therapeutic modality out there. There's so many other options that they don't even know about. And that's like one of the biggest things I try to like introduce to them is all the different types, because it's not one size fits all. What works for you may not work for me and vice versa. So it's like really important to get out there and start understanding what's available. What options do I have? How do I approach this, right? How do I even begin to approach some therapeutic modality that I might be interested in that might work for me? And, when it comes to psychotherapy, especially, the hardest thing is finding the right fit, unfortunately. So sometimes the first person you meet will not be the right fit, and that's okay. And that's the difference between that and like going to the ER because you have a break, an orthopedic break, where pretty much across the country, it's going to be, cookie cutter, like, hey, x-ray, take a look at it. And then there's some outcome, right? With psychology, it's a little more complex, and it's different in the sense that, you might not have a good fit because there's something about the individual that just isn't vibing with you. And that's okay. It's nothing personal. It's just what it is. And so if you find yourself in that situation, like, don't waste your time, move on to another individual. And, if they're definitely kind of not hearing you, you're not on the same page, don't waste your time.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Amen. He's out in California. He has a clinic, has a series of clinics around the country where he does these brain scans, and he scanned like, I don't know, 250,000 people or something. And he can basically look at your brain and tell you at the scan and tell you what's wrong with you. He said, psychology, psychiatry is the only medicine that we don't look at what's broken.
Right.
And so we guess, okay, we think maybe it's this, so we're going to do this. And it's really kind of, a hit or miss.
And treating it is this along the same lines as well. There's so many medications that we can try to use for an individual that's presenting with depression. And unfortunately, it's kind of, you got to play with it and figure out, okay, what works for this individual, and if it's not working or it's doing more damage and we got to switch to something else. And it does take a period of time for those to unfortunately start working. So it's a bit complex, but if you research and you become more educated yourself on the matter, and especially on your particular situation, it just makes it that much easier for you and the professionals to navigate and work together, essentially. I
think that's a really important key, is to really take care of yourself by, like you said, advocating for yourself.
Yes.
If I'd have just blown off the urgent care doctor and just said, okay, she says I'm fine, I must be fine.
Yeah.
And when I happened to mention this to my primary care, she was like, "You did what?" And she goes, "Oh." And then she rattled off all these tests that she was going to run.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a little bit overkill, but I'd rather be there than just someone who doesn't care. But fortunately, it all ended up okay.
Oh, so good to hear.
But I think taking care, I think sometimes even within departments and agencies, I think, well, my department doesn't, provide XYZ. So, well, you have to take care of yourself.
Right. Yeah. I tell individuals all the time, I come from a huge agency that has our own EAP, our employee assistance program, where they have the clinicians and all that available. Does everybody like it? Does everybody trust it? Everyone has their own opinion. That's fine. I tell everyone, I'm like, you don't have to go with your agency. Everyone has insurance, right? Mm-hmm. Go to an outside source, go to someone who's in the private sector, who's not affiliated with the department. Obviously know what the policies are with you going to seek, if they need documentation or anything. I mean, in a lot of cases, they don't. If you're not an inpatient facility or anything like that, for the most part, your agency is fine with going to have talk therapy or all these other kinds of like therapeutic modalities, like no issue. So it really is on us to take care of ourselves. If we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to take care of others. Mm-hmm. But we tend to do this all the time in these professions. We're quick to want to fix everyone else. We want to take care of everyone, want to respond to everything, but we put ourselves last. And that will only go for so long before it catches up with you. I tell people all the time, I've been on this job for 21 years. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when this job and everything else in your personal life, it all catches up to you and it just becomes a lot. Mm-hmm. And we can handle a lot of trauma. We tend to be really good at that, and a lot of like destruction and chaos and all of that we're exposed to. But the problem is at the end of the day, we're still human beings. I know it's hard for us to like swallow that pill, right? Because we want to be like machines or robots, but after a certain point, your body's like, I just can't anymore with all of this. I need to be able to process these traumas. I need to be able to take a minute and try to, just kind of take a breather and focus on how I get past a lot of this. Cause it is a lot. You're being pulled from different directions. Mm-hmm. So I think we're at a time in our lives, especially nowadays in today's society, the world has evolved from the time when our forefathers used to do these jobs, right? The crimes that we're seeing are so much more, they're more gruesome. it's available. All of this that we're exposed to is available, not just on the job, but we're watching it like on social media, on our phones. It's always like in your face. And so it's constantly, happening, and the world has evolved in that way. So we have to evolve. We have to evolve in how we're able to deal with this, right? We can no longer just kind of shove it down and try to put it, away. It only works for so long because it's going to come up.
I love I recently saw a video from a former Navy SEAL, and he was talking about the types of people who make it through BUD/S. And he said, it's not the big strapping jock who's got muscles everywhere and is tough and, has won all the competitions in the previous time. It's not that guy. He said, who gets through BUD/S are the people who care for the guy on his left and the guy on his right. That's who gets through, because they realize it's a team. And I think sometimes that can be maybe a missing factor within the first responder communities, that to be willing to talk to your coworkers, say, hey, I saw you out last night, maybe you had a few too many drinks, is that becoming a problem? And being willing to have those kind of heavy conversations. Do you think that's an issue too?
It's not easy, right? Everyone kind of wants to, mind their own business. And in some other cases, people do want to look the other way. A lot of times we know when something's going on. Listen, we do this every day for a living, whether we want to admit it or not. We are always wanting to investigate everything, right? We're kind of nosy by nature, really, first responders. And we're always wanting to investigate. We're getting called out. Think about this. We're getting called out to deal with people we've never even met in our life. I mean, the first time I walked into a stranger's home and I realized, like, hey, I'm in charge here. They called me. Now I have to step in. I have to take control of the situation, and I'm making decisions for people in their own home. That's crazy, but that's reality. So I walk in, I immediately am trying to get to the bottom of what the issue is here. So my investigative side starts to, kick into gear, and now I have to decide how this is all going to end so I can leave and where we're going to leave all of this. So we know when we see things around us, we're always observant. We're trying to analyze, make decisions. So yeah, sometimes we do know what's going on with other individuals. It's just that sometimes it is pretty difficult. Like, how do I proceed? Because, this is my coworker, this is my friend, and it's kind of tricky. But I think at the very most, I wouldn't say how to move forward, because every case is unique in and of itself. But I think at the very least, if we pay attention, don't be so quick to, disregard every little thing. Just kind of like maybe pay a little attention, maybe have a conversation, kind of ask like we would, and see if there's something there, if there's more, if there's nothing there, if it's, everything's fine, then it's fine. But if we take the time to at least, kind of, maybe ask, talk to each other, in not such a attacking manner, but, just like you would anything else, just approach a situation and kind of ask, hey, is everything good? Just a little conversation. Sometimes just be yourself. You'd be surprised. People may want to, they're probably waiting for that. Sometimes people are waiting. No one's asked, no one's brought it up, and people are waiting for that. You'll know if somebody doesn't want to talk about anything and they put it off, and then, okay, so you kind of, you feel it out.
So let's talk about on the backside of a suicide within a department. How do you bring up that conversation with your coworkers?
So, and we've had quite a number of them, and a lot of individuals that I myself have known through the years. It is a very difficult conversation to have. I think because of the fact that it is so complex, I don't think that a lot of people, agencies themselves, like the leadership, definitely the actual members of the department, I don't think that there's enough knowledge on the suicides. And so that becomes tricky to talk about, right? How do you talk about or give answers or discuss something that really people don't have the info about? It is very emotional for some people, so it's something that's become very taboo, and I understand that. However, what we've been doing isn't working. So my whole argument to any leadership or any agency in the country is we have to stop doing what we're doing and expect a different result. Like, we have to change it, right? Because that's insanity. We're doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. For us to just be like, oh my God, this is terrible, this is awful, and have your opinions about the individual. Oh, that was a coward move. Oh, that's awful. I'm angry at the individual for how can they do this to their family? And then laying them the rest and going back to business as usual, that's not working. So it's time to maybe start having these conversations, and then also deliver like the educational components to it. Because here's the thing, when we had any new major illness that's out there, and I'll just give an example, say the AIDS epidemic. There was a time in our lives in this world where really a lot of people didn't know what it was, right? They had no clue, they knew something was killing, there was something going on, and, it was killing individuals. And so what did we do? We started hearing on the radio. We started hearing on TV. There were magazines, there were newspapers, there were books. People in school were being educated on it in health class, like in younger education. You went to doctor's offices and you saw brochures, and it really talked about what this illness was. Not only did it talk about what it was, but it started to really kind of let people know, hey, this is what you want to maybe avoid, or this is what you want to do so that you don't contract it. There's testing for this. And what did we start? What was that? That is psychoeducating. That really is. It's psychoeducation. You're taking a proactive approach, and by providing the information to people so they know, okay, I'm aware. So you're creating the knowledge, right, for it. You're giving people options on what it is that you shouldn't do, moving forward, how to test, how to be more proactive by being safe, right, and careful. And what do we see? We started to see these numbers drop. I feel that we can do the same thing with suicide. Again, are we going to save every single person? Probably not. I'm not naive. However, can we reduce some of them? Yeah. And there have been some cases that I have seen firsthand through these autopsies where it's very unfortunate. I'm sitting there, observing, and I'm write out these reports, and I think to myself, wow, this one could have really been prevented, right? Like, had this individual had maybe more support, had this individual had a little more knowledge, had this individual been really dealt with these particular issues that I find before they're in a crisis mode, it would be so much easier to navigate versus already in crisis, or even further when they spiral further into a deeper, darker space. And protective factors are the things that keep us going, right? They keep us holding on. They keep us holding on to hope. If those protective factors diminish, you now also become more at risk for suicide. So it's not just the risk factors, but it's the protective factors that we need to have in place to keep us going. So when all that just kind of falls apart, I mean, I don't agree with it, but it does make sense how this ultimately happens.
Mm-hmm. So how should one talk to a friend, a coworker who they think potentially could be suicidal?
So at the very least, I always say, someone, when they're off, right? When they're not kind of like their usual self, if you will, pay attention to that. If there's an individual like, me to be, Miss Chatty Cathy, I'm always pretty, in an upbeat, good mood. I talk to everybody, and you see something that just kind of like, you're sitting there and you can't really ignore. You're just like, Liz is coming in now. She's really not talkative. She's kind of keeping to herself. She's isolating. Like, there's major changes in the behavior, which could be, either extreme, right? Like, I'm either super, it's just out of hand, or I'm just kind of shutting down and isolating. It's still something that's very unusual. Just pay attention to that. You could always ask people, Hey, I've noticed, is everything good? Just simple conversation and checking in with them. I know it's very difficult, but there are times where you have to ask people, hey, have you thought of suicide? Have you thought of taking your life? Because, there's something indicative, something that you think. You can ask an individual that question. It's not going to suddenly just give them the idea like, oh my gosh, no, I had never thought of that. But now that you bring it up, I'm actually going to, it doesn't work like that. We talk a lot about the myths and facts behind suicide. And
I think that's why people have been so afraid to even say those things, say those words to someone.
It's very uncomfortable, to be honest with you. And I do this work and it's still uncomfortable, right? Because you don't want to upset anyone. You don't want to offend anyone. You don't want to cross the line in a sense, it feels like. But given certain circumstances, there's a point where things are being said, you're picking up on certain behaviors, and we have to have this conversation. And we have to say, hey, because there are things that are going on that are very indicative of that. And so that's one of the things I really talk about and discuss when we do the psychoeducation. Also, it's very difficult. You can't really give someone an answer into how to approach it, how to deal with it, because it's one of those totality of all the circumstances and case by case. But I think at the very least, I tell people, pay attention to the things that people are doing and saying or not, right? A lot of times when people are out drinking, there are certain things that we don't typically say usually. And I like to tell people, when we drink, a lot of the truth comes out too. And I've had cases where individuals have said, what's the point of living anymore? I don't want to live anymore. I wish I was never born. And it's kind of like those phrases, we don't just kind of typically walk around throwing them out. If someone says something to you like that, especially if you are interacting with, drinking involved, you might want to just kind of pay attention, okay, instead of completely disregarding it, be like, he's just talking out of his behind because he's having drinks, right? I thought it was just the alcohol talking. Well, yeah, but truth comes out with it. So you might just want to talk and ask, what do you mean by that? Elaborate, or, kind of see hey, what's going on? What's making you say that? And you get a feel. So at the very least, that's what people can do. It is very helpful. And people don't have to jump the gun and just be like, oh my gosh, John's suicidal. Because if you're not a clinician, so, don't jump the gun. It's just very simple interacting, speaking with people, just like we do this job as first responders. We know how to get information out of people. So just be you and have conversation and pay attention. Yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion.
If there is, I would like to say, any case of a suicide of a police officer, fireman, dispatcher, paramedic, or military, I am looking to do more cases. There's a lot of patterns and data that I'm looking for. I'm always, measuring impact and really just trying to see what's just learn more, see more cases, and integrate whatever we feel is necessary into the psychoeducation, because this is really about trying to get the information out to everyone and being very proactive with it. So anyone can contact me. I usually don't do them. The earliest I do them is 3 months post a suicide, because I like to give the families and everybody time to grieve and really just kind of go through that very difficult situation. So I don't want it to be too soon and too raw. But even if it's been a couple years, just contact me. We can discuss, and it is something that we can still really go back to and try to get some information for. And they can contact me.
And where can people go to learn more?
So Resilient Heroes, it's www.resilient-heroes.com. That is our website. It is a non-for-profit 501c3. And we are always, it is obviously not, a self-sustainable, mission. We are not for profit. So to get out to these different agencies across the country and get this out, we really do appreciate and need the support of everyone through donations. We're always looking for grants, and we are doing fundraisers. So keep us in mind. Visit the webpage. You could always make a donation there. And you could always contact me for anything. And there's just so many more things that are coming up that we're going to be putting out. And ideally, we would like to get this out. This is the whole point of the not-for-profit, is that we get this to all the agencies and organizations out there that need this, so that we don't have to worry about finances, budgeting, and all of that from the agency's village or township, whoever runs them. You know, we need this. We don't have enough support and the self-care, if you will, options for the first responders when it comes to this. And no one's really talking about suicide. We're doing better nowadays with wellness out there and doing more training regarding mental health and wellness, but it stops there. People don't really tap into suicide. It's so uncomfortable, and it's a separate entity. So really getting into this conversation and offering the proactive approach is so necessary. And we don't want finances for the agency to be something that keeps them from giving this to their members. So that is the idea behind Resilient Heroes. We will bring this to the agency, offer all these self-care tools and resources for the members, and not have to worry about, financial budgets and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is the first time I've ever said this to anyone, but I really hope that you have less work.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I do hope so.
I hope that we can reduce that number of people taking their own lives. So as we wrap up here, I want you to talk to the person who may be listening or watching this and have had some of those thoughts. Okay. What should they do?
So realistically, the numbers, the research that we have out there with individuals having at some point within these occupations, having had some thoughts along the lines of suicide, just the thought, even just coming into mind, it happens a lot for a lot of individuals, where it's at least crossed their mind at the very least. Here's the thing. We can come out of this. We really, really can. As hard as it feels, as tough as everything is in your personal life and your careers, it seems like it's so painful, right? There's so much pain, and it becomes to feel unbearable. And a lot of people sometimes feel like their families are better off without them. This way of thinking and this feeling, this is something that can be worked through. I know individuals who have actually attempted to take their lives, right? And fortunately for them, were unsuccessful. And after that, after such an incident, have gone in to get the resources to have whatever it is that they need put in place to work through and move past this. They have come out of it, and they are living their best freaking lives today. So when I tell you, you can come out of this, half the time we just don't have the right support, resources, or people helping us along the way. However that has come about, we really can come out of it, as tough as it seems. So I just want people to understand that there's sometimes just things that we don't know how to go about it. Remember, we're always in control. We always have the answers. But when we don't have the answers for ourselves and how to fix what we got going on, or, how to go about receiving what we need, it can become a lot, and it's very devastating. And we just continue to once you go further spiraling down that hole, it becomes darker and heavier. But I'm telling you, I've seen so many individuals that I've spoken to who've actually attempted, and they've come out of it, fortunately for them. And when I see a lot of these cases that I've worked on, it's just so sad to know that there were ways that we could have gotten through this. As hard as it is, it'll take work, and it's hard, but you do come out of it.
Well, Liz, you're doing important work. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
And thank you for taking time to talk to me today here on the podcast. And I think the conversation we had, I think it was important and interesting. And I think there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be eager to perhaps reach out. So watch out.
Appreciate that. No, absolutely. You can call me and text me, or call me, email me. All the information is on the website anytime. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Liz, for the important work that you're doing, and thanks for being on the program today. Hey, be sure to check out the links to Liz's website in the show notes below, and don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with your tribe. And please remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.